Hello and welcome back to Psalm Talks. This is Sarah Hussein. I'm an engineer and researcher, and my areas of interest are the mind and consciousness. This podcast is all about how to use your mind and your consciousness to live a life to the fullest. I also get the opportunity to sit down with very smart individuals and discuss on these two areas. Today, I got the pleasure to speak with one of the people that I am a massive fan of, Dr. Howard Eisenberg. He is a medical doctor and has postgraduate training in both psychology and psychiatry. He has been a lecturer at the University of Toronto and an associate professor of medicine at the University of Vermont. He is also the CEO of the international consultancy Syntrek. On a more personal level, he has been on a passionate lifelong quest to discover the true nature of reality. He was awarded the first postgraduate degree in Canada at McGill University for his highly successful parapsychological research on telepathy. So you can only imagine how excited I am to be speaking with him. He is a treat to listen to. I would say that keep a pen and a paper handy. You might need to take some notes. All right, without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Dr. Howard.
Hi, Sarah.
Your book, Dream It to Do It, is what I got interested in reading. And there were several places in the book which got me thinking because you talk about reality and how it works. A lot of the people listening to the podcast are interested in how reality works because it's something we feel that we need to be able to control to some degree in our lives. However, that's the tricky part, because how do you build your own life? And so my questions to you are going to be in the premises of that. So I guess my first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, in some ways it goes back to a long time interest going to my childhood, as I remember early childhood. I'm just wondering about the world again, how it works, different countries, different types of people and beliefs, and even wondered about God. I was aware as a child there were many people who had different religious backgrounds, and they were faithful to them, and they were told they had to be faithful to them. But I thought, even as a young child, if there's really God, why all these different interpretations? And not only were they different interpretations, there was animosity sometimes. You weren't supposed to mix with those people because they're of a different faith and so on. So as a young child, I was aware of that. And also became interested, believe it or not, in science fiction because it was imaginative science in a sense. And as you may know, so much of what was envisioned by science fiction authors has actually become our reality, for good and bad, because they also envisioned a dystopian future, which we're heading towards right now. So all of this was, again, sparking up my sense of wonderment and awareness of more and more in different ways. And somehow I became aware that there was parapsychological research going down at Duke University in North Carolina by J.B. Ryan, who was one of the American pioneers and one of the international pioneers of looking at psychic phenomena from a scientific lens. We called it parapsychology research. And I found, just from reading some paperback books, because I was a consummate reader at that point, that he was doing real research, and it sparked my interest. I thought, wow, what's more fascinating? These sort of superpowers, and it's leading edge, and the controversy didn't deter me. It kind of was exciting. It was a challenge. I eventually did meet him, by the way, in person. I went down to see him, and convinced the university of at the time, McGill University, to allow me to do research in this field, which was a whole other story, by the way, about manifestation, if you want to call it that. But still, at this point, I'm still looking at everything, broadly, I'd say, with a scientific lens. I'm trying again to understand how things work analytically, and then have some framework that, of explanatory and predictive power in a scientific way. And I was assuming until approximately just 4 or 5 years ago that ultimately we would find other forces, other dimensions that would explain these things that
Mm-hmm.
scientists in the hardcore were denying was even possible because it defied the laws, of science
Right.
as they understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had an invitation, again, a few years ago, to do a keynote presentation for the annual conference of a group of therapeutic touch practitioners as a form of laying on of hands for healing, I felt honored by the invitation. And I decided I would to honor it properly, do a very deep dive over a few months into all of the literature since I wrote
Mm-hmm.
my first book, Inner Spaces, almost 50 years ago. And not just in the parapsychological realm, but in cross spirituality studies, indigenous studies, the leading edge
Right.
of quantum mechanics and physics, um, the new
Yeah.
psychedelic science that's sort of, emerging, um, putting all those things,
Mm-hmm.
together. And suddenly something just crystallized. Some would call it insight. Some might say it's a revelation. I suddenly realized,
Mm-hmm.
intellectually and experientially, that the scientific assumption that there's a world out there that we can study and as we learn, we can master it was totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Not partially wrong, totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That was all a form of illusion. I like to call it a level of reality. I mean, you can
Yeah.
say it exists, yes, but it's not the whole
Mm-hmm.
picture. Just like,
Yes.
tip of an iceberg is not
Right.
an indication of the mass submerged, below the water level.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly again, I had this
Yeah.
realization. I'm talking when I say suddenly minutes, a minute or two. And it was
Mm-hmm.
fairly powerful because I felt it emotionally too. And believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things that I experienced was a sense of fear. Like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm all alone. Yeah, I'm aware. It's all like sort of illusory, including people, everything.
Right.
I'm all alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yuck.
Mm-hmm.
But then, fortunately, quickly, again, maybe seconds,
Mm-hmm.
it expanded into an awareness that I'm not alone and only one. I'm part of
Mm-hmm.
all that is, all that
Right.
is sentient and all the inanimate matter as well,
Yeah.
everything. So it's a sense again of
Yeah.
profound
Yeah.
connection in a way that I had never previously,
Right.
even imagined possible. It is said by mystics that the mystical experience is ineffable, that it's so beyond normal, cognition and experience. You can't put it in words. My
Mm-hmm.
task became, once I understood this, and once I understood the dire state of our world in so many ways, I felt called, I felt impelled. I have to share this. Um, I have to
Yeah.
help free people. I thought of it, and I still do, as a wake up call.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're all in this kind of trance, just like when we're in dreams at night. And sometimes we don't realize it's a dream. Sometimes it's really bad, like a nightmare. But as real as it
Yeah.
seems, it's not what we call reality, right? You wake up from it. And I think collectively, humanity right now is in a
Yeah.
very bad dream, a nightmare. And I'm trying to help them wake up and get out of it fast while we still have some chance to do that at this level.
There are two things that got my attention. The first is that you said that there was a manifestation story when you were able to do the research in the university. I'm intrigued because I know how sometimes psychic abilities are taken or perceived in the scientific world, in the academic world, and oftentimes it's judged like as if it's some sort of irrelevant idea. Yeah. And perhaps this is not what scientific or people coming from an educational background should think of like or should even believe in. So how is it as your experience when you got into the university, and how were you able to convince them that this is a relevant area of research and it is worth your time and their investment as well?
So there's two parts to this story, and I'll try to keep it somewhat condensed. And really, this is an illustration of, yes, the power of manifestation, which I try to explain in some detail in my book, even though it's concise, that there's certain steps,
Mm-hmm.
for that to happen. So one of the primary ones to begin with is our imagination. uh, if you choose to envision a desired reality, a better reality in some respects, and if you can put your belief into it and your intention,
Right.
um, it can manifest and come true.
Mm-hmm.
So, rolling back to your question, when I graduated, my first undergraduate degree from McGill University was in honors psychology. I then went on to do some graduate research at a different university in
Mm-hmm.
the U.S., University of California. Became disillusioned with the state of psychology research back then,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought I'll do something more serious. So I came back to McGill and enrolled in the medical school.
Mm-hmm.
But that was also boring because it's mostly just rote memorization. I still needed some excitement.
Yeah.
And because I already had the honors degree, and because I was also doing a medical degree and obviously accepted
Mm-hmm.
for my qualifications, I was able to convince one of the professors in the psychology department to sponsor me as a graduate student
Mm-hmm.
and to do research in this area. He was a little more open minded than most. I think he was maybe the only one back then. And to also get it through,
Mm-hmm.
I chose as the other member of my thesis committee, the hardest core skeptic in the department who was also a statistical genius.
Mm-hmm.
So he was my advisor or critic,
Yeah.
on statistical analyses. Um, so I did that part. But then I had to go to the administration and get permission to do 2 degrees at one time
Mm-hmm.
in 2 different faculties, Faculty of Graduate Studies and Faculty of Medicine.
Right.
He said, "You can't do it." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because no one's ever done it before."
Mm.
I said, "Well, we're supposed to be at the leading edge of knowledge. Why should that stop us?" And they said, "Well, it's more complicated too." I said, "How so?" He said, "Every student has a computer ID number. You'd be at 2 different faculties at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
How would we process that?" And I said, "The computers are not supposed to control us. It's supposed to be serving our interests, modify it.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can
Yeah.
program that aspect." And then
It's
they said,
figure
thirdly,
outable.
what about, but how do we charge you tuition? Like, is it double tuition? You're going to use the same library at times. So, and I said, I'm not asking for a discount. The point is, I was able to imagine, despite the barriers, being able to have this happen.
Right.
And that's where the also intention and belief comes into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the department itself, the chairman was D.O. Hebb at the time, who was an avowed skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you couldn't be more explicit. He actually said, "Is that program possible?" And his own attitude is prejudice. He admitted that in writing. Um, and I decided too, in envisioning, I can get through with this research here successfully and prove the case. And it was very powerful research, by the way, in terms of the results. And I can convince him, as hardcore skeptic as he is personally, to agree. It's not impossible. It is real. And after I did my research, by the way, another graduate student replicated some of my research, similar findings,
Mm-hmm.
that yes, telepathy is real under all the controls we made it back then.
Yeah.
So those are examples of a repeat, not being going to limiting beliefs, not being limited
Mm-hmm.
by convention, by what was, not being limited by people's initial attitude,
Mm-hmm. Right.
focused again on what the goal is you
Mm-hmm.
envision, and empowering it with your belief and intention.
Yeah, it almost seems like that when you set an intention, it doesn't matter what the reality looks like at that time. Just
Yes,
believe that you have it.
yes. Like one of the examples, I have, as you may remember, Sarah, in the first chapter of my book, is in some of the martial arts, they teach people, and sometimes even young students, young kids, how to break a wooden board with their bare hand.
Right. I've done that when
And
I was a little.
and and my son had that experience at around age 10. I didn't know what to expect. I was there in the audience with their parents watching a demonstration of their class.
Yeah.
And I asked them afterwards, because I knew they had to teach them to do something.
Yeah.
I said, like, how did they teach you to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And every child, by the way, who took one blow at the board with bare hand,
Mm-hmm.
broke the board.
Yeah.
Every one.
Yeah.
There were maybe a dozen of them.
Yeah.
And he said they taught them to strike beyond the board.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the board to me is limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
You say, on one level, it's reality.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, if we understand modern physics,
Yeah.
going back to science,
Yeah.
it's 99.9999% empty space.
Right. Yeah.
The solidity is an illusion.
It's, yeah. This part of physics, it really gets me because as much as I have an understanding of physics, that's something I use a lot. It's almost like my support system in academics,
Hmm.
because I go like, oh, look, physics explains this. Um,
Hmm.
but when I think about how matter is 99% void, it tricks me because this is all matter, right? The table is matter. It's made out of atoms and it's 99% void. And so that
Hmm.
means in physics, essentially, that means that I am in, it is a structure which has 99% vacuum and
And it
only,
gets worse. And then we used to think there were fundamental building particles in a material
yeah,
sense, right?
yeah.
Electrons, protons,
Mm-hmm.
neutrons. And now we know there aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And in modern physics, what we're told is there's only zones of probability of what could be, what could manifest,
Yeah,
and it requires human observation
right.
for that to happen. So, for example, the famous physicist Wheeler said, "It's a participatory universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It needs us
yeah,
to observe it
yeah,
for it to manifest."
yeah. There has to be an observer for us to observe an object. So essentially, an object's existence is reliant on the observer. So
Yes, and that's mhm,
unless there is an observer, the object is it's ambiguous. It can be there, it cannot be there, but again, that depends on the observer.
that's right. And as you may remember, the title of my chapter 2 is the only thing you can absolutely know.
Yeah,
That we're an observer, that
right.
we're aware.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything else, belief, assumption.
yeah, absolutely. I think some people who are going to be listening to this episode are going to go like, "What? What? We get it, but what?" In McGill University, you mentioned that you did an experiment
Mhm.
in telepathy,
Yeah.
and that was your that was a turning point, right? Because it explained, it almost proved telepathy. It proved telepathy to the chairman at the time.
Yeah.
I would love to know what that experiment entailed. Like, what did you think you would do to prove it?
So I knew from my reading of the research literature in parapsychology that it was often tied with emotional experiences. When people have psychic experiences, often, I'm talking lay people right now,
Mm-hmm.
not trained psychics or mediums, anything of that nature. But for example, a death of a loved one at some distance would wake them up in the middle of the night. They would just know at that moment.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
they'd know before the phone rang who's going
right.
to call them. You
Yeah,
know, they could tell someone was looking at them from a distance, even though you visually couldn't see them. They sensed it.
yeah.
Um, so all these various things, and trying to make sense of these personal experiences in a scientific frame. I thought that I had a way, predictably,
Mm-hmm.
of creating an emotional experience for what I called a sender or a transmitter person. There were two
Mm.
people. There was a transmitter and a receiver person, so to speak. So
Mm.
if I could create with some objective, reliability, this is pre-computer era in many ways. Um, and what I decided to do was to take excerpts of a number of different motion picture films of all
Mm.
types. So I had some that were beautiful nature aesthetic, like National Film Board, and I also had things like that were kind of gruesome, like the Boston Strangler. And so these
Wow.
are very different, powerful emotions. I
Yeah.
couldn't, of course, guarantee everyone would have the same opinions as we don't know about movies and so on, but it was somewhat of a way, of shaping an experience they would have in a
Right.
period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the other end, the sender had a receiver, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
This is on a modern concrete building on two different floors.
Mm-hmm.
And the receiver's in a room with a locked door with a research assistant outside of it. There's no windows. There's
Mm-hmm.
no way for them to have any communication with anyone. And they're just lying there on a cot in the dark, just told to relax, just let your
Yeah.
mind go. Don't try to do anything in particular, just, let it
Yeah.
go.
Don't think what's going to be
Right.
coming. Yeah.
And then after the stimulus period, where the
Mm-hmm.
sender is watching this excerpt from a movie, my assistant would awaken the receiver, turn on the lights, bring them to a table where they could write, and say, please write down whatever impressions came to mind during that period of time. And that's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like a more of a free association thing. But then again, even then, I was really into scientific rigor because it all had to be me. I was getting help from the department. They're all
Yeah.
disbelievers. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, so another way to maybe to capture data here, given that not everyone's going to have the same reaction, let's say again to a movie. Some will like
Mm-hmm.
it, some won't like it, some will be afraid, some will be entranced, etc.
Yeah.
What's another way for me to get more information here and with strict protocols? So I thought I would create a deck of photographs think it was 6 photographs.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was from part of the movie clip that was
Mm-hmm.
shown. The others were all different, but visually you could not tell that one was shown the movie, one wasn't. It was a real mix again, almost in a
Hmm.
random way. So
Interesting.
then what I asked them to do, both at the sender side and receiver side, after they've had the
Mm-hmm.
experience, said, okay, now here's a deck of, several photographs. Rank order them in terms of how close they approximated your experience during this,
Wow.
period.
Yeah.
And then I could look at first, did they pick the top one, both of them, that
Oh,
correlates, and they did. And then I
yeah.
also looked, is there also a rank correlation between the other
Mm-hmm.
ones? And there was.
Mm-hmm.
So all types of data proving this.
Wow, that is fascinating. So, when you were the receiver end,
Mhm.
did you think that they should set an intention that they're about to receive something
No,
from
they
the
they knew
sender?
the experiment was a Telepathy experiment.
Yeah,
That's all they knew. They were not given no hints about type of
yeah,
film that might be shown.
yeah,
Just lie here, rest, and whatever comes to your mind,
yeah,
if you're able to, when you lights come back on and you're awakened
yeah,
from this, just write it down, and then the deck of
yeah.
photographs.
This is beyond interesting, because the deck of photographs is really what solidifies
Hmm.
that they are on the same
Yeah.
wavelength when it comes to their thoughts
Yes.
and they're thinking the same things. Had it been an explanation, perhaps there would be room for um, margin for error, because an explanation can vary, it could be
Hmm.
personal. Um, I think the photographs is what solidifies that this works. So
Hmm.
this is very interesting. I'm gonna be geeking out on it in my free time. All right. So I guess my next question was, how does reality work? You have touched on your own manifestation story. The fact that we set an intention, it doesn't matter what is happening around us at the time, just believe your intention is going to be fulfilled and it will. So, in some way, it seems like that we are this home transmitters who are projecting out an intention. And as long as we hold on to that intention and we believe that it is true, the reality is going to change itself and prove that it is true.
Well, it's just
Yeah.
as in quantum mechanics we were discussing before in physics, we're dealing now with the concept of zones of probability as opposed to fixed entities.
Yeah.
So just to for some corrective feedback on that about manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the basic formula, but I have to add something very important here.
Yeah.
And it goes back to your deeper question, how reality works. And that is
Mm-hmm.
those. So if you do all the right things that we understand for manifestation, and as I say, I try to explain them as key steps in my book, it doesn't guarantee that you will have that manifest. What it does is increases the probabilities that it will happen. So it really does. I mean, just like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, medicine, the placebo effect. If
Mm-hmm.
people believe something that chemically has no power, it's inert, so-called sugar
Mm-hmm.
pill, will have some beneficial effect for them in terms of pain reduction, or even sometimes as an antibiotic, they have an
Mm-hmm.
infection. If they
Yeah.
believe it enough, then many of them do get that benefit. But not everyone
Right.
believes it enough,
Right. Right.
So it's a probable thing that the
It's
placebos,
a
again, will
probable
affect
thing.
many people, but not say everyone. But now at a
Yeah.
deeper level, coming back to this
Mm-hmm.
and how reality works. And again, in part, uh, my first two chapters at first, again, is things you don't honestly see, which are sort of discussing, the illusory aspect of this is reality. And the second,
Mm-hmm.
as I say, chapter is the only thing you can absolutely know. Again, that we're an observer, that we're conscious.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the only thing we can know, and there's nothing that we can be sure is outside of us,
Mm-hmm.
then we have to go back to, I think, now to some of the spiritual teachings
Mm-hmm.
about the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have, in recent years, recent times, from different religions, have become sort of caught up in the belief, I think a corrupted belief, that their lives are controlled externally from them, not by political entities, but by God or other deities
Mm-hmm.
in different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how it started. Those were not the
Mm-hmm.
original teachings.
Mm-hmm.
The original teachings were that we are all part of what some people call God. I like to use the term now source. It's
Mm-hmm.
non-denominational. It doesn't have some of the emotional triggers it may be for
Yeah,
some
it's
people, different
neutral.
religions and so on. Yeah, but I
Yeah,
think it's also true because I think it's the
it's
source of
true.
all. So,
Right.
come back to your question. Given that this world in some ways is partially illusion, and it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all. Just like when we have a dream, it's partially illusion, but it doesn't mean the dream doesn't exist. I mean, we still have, the dream.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that at a deeper level, source dreams up the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
and we are extensions of source.
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare said we're all, players on a stage. Um, I like to think we're like the waves of a cosmic ocean. So
Mm,
if you took a
that's
fixed
beautiful.
photograph,
Yeah.
you could point to different waves. Oh, this is a bigger wave. This is a smaller one. This
Yeah.
one's growing. This one's disappearing.
Yeah.
But they all are based in the same reality of the ocean.
Yeah.
And I think that's more the nature of our existence. And why would Source dream up this world?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's because Source is just wanting to spread more love, period. In some way that we
Mm-hmm.
may try to frame it in human terms. Source needs us and
Mm-hmm.
this world
Mm-hmm.
because you can't have consciousness without something to
Mm-hmm.
be conscious of.
Mm-hmm.
Give you
Yeah.
an example. When you look in a mirror and you
Mm-hmm.
see your face, and you know it by
Mm-hmm.
now, if you look after a few moments, and I wouldn't suggest more than a few minutes for most people, seriously, you start to realize that yes, I'm seeing my familiar face,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see me. I'm seeing my face. What
I
is what
sometimes
is what is
feel that.
seeing me? What is seeing
Yeah.
my face?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we come back to, you know, again, that connection, that awareness of a deeper source.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're amphibious beings. So just like amphibians, like frogs and salamanders, can live in water or on land, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that we are at least of dual nature, that,
Mm-hmm.
that we can exist in this dimension, so to speak, that we call it consensual reality, as apparently separate beings, separate
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and separate from our physical environment and the other, animal kingdom and plant life and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
at our level, we're all connected.
Right.
And when you forget about the connection and get
Mm-hmm.
too much into ego
Mm-hmm.
and too much into emotions like fear and
Mm-hmm.
greed,
Mm-hmm.
you're greatly distanced from source. You
Right.
lose the sense of connectivity. You
Mm-hmm.
lose the wisdom. You
Mm-hmm.
lose what we would call heartfelt compassion,
Mm-hmm.
because what connects us all on this level, if we're open to
Mm-hmm.
it, and we're so in need of it right now, is love. Love
Mm-hmm.
connects. Hate
Mm-hmm.
separates.
Right.
And fear also separates.
Yeah.
And there's a song called "What the World Needs Now Is Love," just
Yeah.
love. And
Yeah.
I really think it is. And as I explained in my book, there's so much misconception, even in Western science, about what we understand. So even
Mm-hmm.
coming back to more basic things like the brain and consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
so many people assume, scientifically, in the West at least, that the physical brain in our head produces consciousness. In
Mm-hmm.
reality, there's no evidence for that.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, there's only what we call correlations, that you would, do
Right.
things to the brain which modify our experience or our behavior.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
a source. You can do that to a radio. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that other people with a different radio that isn't being manipulated are going to hear
Yeah.
the distortion and in the radio you're causing because you're playing with it. Or if
Yeah.
something goes wrong with our computer, it doesn't mean there's still not something on the internet that millions of other
Mm-hmm.
people can experience well.
Right.
But it's even more in some ways embarrassing scientifically than that, because we now know that all human beings have at least three physical brains.
Mm-hmm.
So aside from the brain not being the source of consciousness, even if we want
Mm-hmm.
to play with the concept of brain and consciousness, there's
Mm-hmm.
at least three in our body.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is the heart brain. Another is what we call the gut brain, the microbiome,
Mm-hmm.
the bacterial population in our large colon.
Mm-hmm.
The heart has its own nervous system. The
Mm-hmm.
heart has its own memory system. The
Mm-hmm.
heart has more nerves controlling brain function in the head than the head brain can modify the heart. The
Right.
heart can produce its own hormones like oxytocin, the love hormone. The heart
Yeah.
seems to be a portal to intuition. We talk about, somebody being warm-hearted, heartfelt. It's a deeper level. Again,
It's a
it's
deeper
connected to
level.
into love and connection.
Right. So when I was listening to your book, I heard about this in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and you go into great depth. So if there are listeners who are interested where they can learn more about it, the link to the book is going to be in the show notes. Dr. Howard, I'm going to take a few steps back to that wave that you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And you had mentioned that we are all a part of the bigger consciousness, the
Mm-hmm.
higher consciousness
Mm-hmm.
that connects us all. And we all have a different function, but we're working with the same. We all are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then you spoke about the dual nature of us as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That dual nature is something I deeply connect with. And it is, whenever I have clients or even in some during the podcast episodes, I talk a lot about our egoistic self and our true self.
Mm-hmm.
Because human beings, just by nature, are dual. We're spiritual, but we have a physical body,
Mm-hmm.
and that brings the essence of duality to us. So when you talk about how reality works, um, one of the things and which you touched upon is that emotions like fear and hatred, anything
Mm-hmm.
that's negative,
Mm-hmm.
emerging from the ego,
Mm-hmm.
it keeps us away from the source, which is with our true self.
Yes.
And to manifest great things or to manifest things which
Mm-hmm.
we really want, our heartfelt desires, it's important to be in touch with source, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We can be in the state of ego. Otherwise, the ego is just going to give us fear, and we wouldn't be able to successfully manifest the things that we want. I would love for you to touch upon how fear plays a role from letting people live the life to the fullest.
Well, I use a concept at the beginning of my book, limiting beliefs, and going back
Mm-hmm.
to the example I mentioned of in martial arts, how you break through a wooden board. So just because we're taught certain things, just because we have an experience of certain things, doesn't necessarily mean that's how things have to be. But many of us don't
Right.
realize that, and we're fearful of turning away from that. Like coming back to religion, many people are brought up, I repeat, not just taught about a certain faith, but they're almost, in some cases, forced,
Mm-hmm.
either externally or because their fear is provoked by the family
Mm-hmm.
that you can't
Right.
possibly, ignore the tradition of our
Yeah.
family and so on. Um, Fear, as I said, separates us. And so, although source dreams us up, and back to, as I said, the Shakespearean quote, we're all players on a stage, it's not, there's no maliciousness in it. It just allows us to be out in the world again as an extension of how we can experience in a way itself. It's awkward using words,
Mm-hmm.
to express
Yeah.
this, but we can partly do it. Um, it doesn't deal with the morality issue in itself. But when you're having, like going back to just conventional dreams, almost always would prefer to have a pleasant dream as opposed to a nightmare. So
Mm-hmm.
this is not good at any level of what we're experiencing right now. And we're living in a
Mm-hmm.
world now of tremendous fear, which weirdly
Mm-hmm.
enough has been greatly amplified by this.
Phone.
And now with, ChatGPT emerging and AI rushing, to penetrate so many of our spaces in our culture,
Right.
um, we're more and more again into, on one hand, information overload, but also tremendous confusion as to be able to sort out and think things out properly. And we look, for
Mm-hmm.
example, what's happening right now in the USA and America. Until recently, it was considered the leading democracy in the world, the wealthiest country,
Mm-hmm.
the strongest country. And as we speak
Right.
right now, because of fear and hatred, divisiveness, basically, it's at risk
Mm-hmm.
of as failing as an entire country. Real risk.
Yeah.
And in the
Yeah.
very near future. That's reality. And that's from fear being stoked purposely by certain ill-serving political leaders who do it for their own egos, but they know
Mm-hmm.
how to stoke that emotion in people, which overwhelms them.
Yeah.
In more conventional terms, in my medical and psychiatry background, we call it,
Mm-hmm.
activating the amygdala, and we call it
Mm-hmm.
amygdala hijack. It's the primitive part of our brain that responds instinctively to fear and when we
Mm-hmm.
get angry. and it actually drains the blood from the top part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we believe we have our higher thinking processes.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes very
Right.
consuming and
Mm-hmm.
blinding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is, it seems like a common state of the world right now.
It is. I mean, the
When,
UK
yeah,
broke off from the European Union. Russia's invaded Ukraine. Then there's global climate change. So back to what I said
right.
earlier too. Once I connected the dots and had that experience of the oneness and our
Mm-hmm.
connectedness with everything, I felt
Mm-hmm.
I have to speak out. I have to
Right.
shout out a wake up call as loudly and as broadly as I have energy to do.
Yeah.
This is scary.
Yeah.
We're not just
It's a
having a
scary.
few problems in the world. And some people say, well, you always had problems, challenges. In part, that's true, but not like this. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like, the second expulsion from the Garden of Eden of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It's already, we're out.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't bring back
We're
what
out.
we enjoyed
Yeah.
when we were younger.
Yeah. And you know, it takes me back to what I was listening to in your book. I think it was chapter number 6,
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking about an organization which is going to be in my notes. It is led by Roger Nelson, and it is a multidisciplinary research project,
Mm-hmm.
and it's how the group consciousness of the world impacts the magnetic field of the world and the whole
The whole
planet.
planet,
So
yes.
that essentially is in alignment with what you were saying about fear, how fear is stoked into people. And because they're encouraged to always be anxious and fearful, because that is, it's like staying in survival mode. When enough people are doing that,
Mm-hmm.
we are impacting each other at large. We're impacting the whole universe at large.
That's right. We are. Even going back to the heart being one of the sort of physical brains, the heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends at least 6 feet
Mm-hmm.
around the body. When you're in proximity of someone else, the two electromagnetic
Mm-hmm.
fields interact. So if you're coming from hate, other people feel it. Sometimes people use expressions like that person had
Mm-hmm.
bad vibes,
Yeah.
or they feel again
Right.
so warm-hearted. Because your heart can also sense at a much more profound level than your
Yeah.
head brain
Absolutely.
the emotion, the nature of
And
people.
this is something that everybody experiences. So it's not a selective experience. Everyone experiences vibes in the real world. I got good vibes from this person, place, thing, activity.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get good vibe. And oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
where we struggle is when we want to rationalize that vibe and we want to support it with
Mm-hmm.
our own reasoning, but we cannot, because you may have the best conversation with someone that you don't get the best vibes from. So how do you decide your future
Mm-hmm.
interactions in that case? And yeah, would love to know what you say.
Well, I think it's more fulfilling for us in all ways to choose again what makes us feel more
Mm-hmm.
connected to people and nature around us. And if you can be non-judgmental with people, which is hard because we're taught with ego to be
Mm-hmm.
so judgmental with prejudices of all sorts, which, if anything, are somewhat worse right now in the world than they've been for a long time, unfortunately, back to the divisiveness we're experiencing. But if you can learn to be non-judgmental and just sense this person for whatever is so
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from you, from reality, from morality, and if you can try
Mm-hmm.
from your heart to connect, call it in Buddhism
Yeah.
loving kindness,
Yeah.
for others. Um, Sometimes with a person like that in a situation like that, it will
Mm-hmm.
break through that guardedness, that
Right.
filtering
Right.
that they have. I'm not saying always. Back to what I said earlier about manifestation, it's a probabilistic in a
Mm-hmm.
sense universe. If the source totally knew everything that everyone would do all the time and what would happen, it would be like one of us watching the same show on Netflix, same one over and over again
Right.
for infinity. Wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be desirable. So there has to be an intrinsic randomness to a degree. That's why I say it's not absolute, it's
Mm-hmm.
probabilistic.
Yeah. About that, sometimes people think that how good do they need to be when they're approaching somebody in order to almost cancel out their bad vibes? And I do take it, in physics, there's constructive wave, destructive waves. when you have enough of a good consciousness that expands, you can almost transmute and, change your interaction with people. You can make it great.
Yeah, I mean, for example, poets sometimes refer to the eyes being windows of the soul.
Right.
And there is something to that. And when you are looking into someone's eyes, which we can't really do on, our Zoom screens, even though we think we can, but that's against illusion, right?
Right.
It's not the same. But when you do in, as we call it, real life, as opposed to, on a screen, so to speak, there is if you're open to it, it does allow you to connect much more deeply with anyone. You could be passing, a young infant in a stroller, and little babies often look at people's eyes. And if you are open to it, you'll both have a smile and it will feel really good. You'll feel that connection. You don't know the parent of that
Happens
child
all
or
the time,
whatever,
right? When you see kids.
But also, as it used to be when there was less fear and less divisiveness because, again, of these so-called smart devices, which make us dumber. And people would pass each other on the street. Sometimes you just nod your head, you say good morning. You didn't always know the people. That almost never happens.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody wants to change their life right now and they want one step to get started with, what it is that you would suggest?
In large way, I'd say it's getting more in touch with your intuition. So what interests you? Why does it interest you? And then if you could start imagining in your mind more vividly what it maybe would look like if you were in that type of relationship, if you moved to that location, if you were in that type of a job. And then it's almost like backtracking in your mind in terms of action steps. All right, so that's a map where I want to go. And what are some possible things I can do right now? Not the whole thing right now, but what's the first step? Second step, like the Chinese expression, journey of 1,000 miles comes with the first step. And that goes back again, to the intention and discipline. Then it's, again, increases the probability big time that you will have that more desirable reality for you. And so, again, using the intuition and then amplifying it, in a sense, with imagination, and then bringing in belief, which is not so easy for people, because it's like an unwavering belief. And then, the intention just go all the way through. You're not going to, stop at the wooden board.
So connect with your intuition, expand on it with imagination, and come up with it with some belief.
Yes, exactly.
And try to not waver from it too much, right?
Ideally
Which is the tricky part. Ideally at all. Yeah, definiteness.
Yes.
We're going to wrap up the episode here. Dr. Howard, would love to have you for part 2. I have so many questions. I was writing down, you want to see my notes? I was making notes as you were talking. Thank you for listening to the podcast. It was a pleasure to be recording this for you, and it is always a pleasure to be hearing your feedback through reviews and emails. For suggestions and feedback, you can write to me at hello@officialpsalm.com. And for all information regarding Dr. Howard, please take a look at the show notes. His books are an amazing read, so I would highly encourage you to do so. And let me know what you thought about today's episode. I'd love to hear how it impacted you. Any thoughts, stories, and suggestions? Alrighty. I'll let you go now, and I'll catch you next time.